The Abingdon Plantation. The Abingdon Plantation was home to many famous families, including the Alexander family, the Custis family, the Stewart family, and the Hunter family. Abingdon then became home to industry, including home of the Alfred Richard Brick Company, the New Washington Brick Company, and the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad, then becoming home to the U.S. government and to the Metro Washington Airport Authority. The Alexander family. In October of 1669, 6,000 acres of land were purchased by Captain John Alexander from Robert Howson for the total of 6,000 pounds of tobacco. No one in the Alexander family lived on this land until the mid-1740s, when his great-grandson Gerard Alexander built a home overlooking the bluff of the Potomac River. He named this home the Abingdon. The city of Alexandria is named after the Alexander family. The Custis family. John Parke Custis, son of Martha Washington, bought just over 900 acres and the Abingdon Plantation in 1778. He then moved his family into the home in 1779. On March 31st of 1779, his daughter, Eleanor Nellie Parke Custis, was born inside of the Abingdon home. President George Washington and his wife Martha often stayed at the Abingdon Plantation. John Parke Custis died at Abingdon after contracting camp fever in Yorktown in 1781. His widow married Dr. David Stewart in 1783. At this time, Nellie and her brother George Washington Parke Custis moved to Mount Vernon and were adopted and raised by their grandmother Martha and step-grandfather George Washington. Eleanor Calvert Custis remained at Abingdon after her husband's death. She married George Washington's friend and business associate, Dr. David Stewart, in the fall of 1783. The couple had 16 children together. 3 of them were born in Abingdon. Stewart was appointed by Washington to serve as the commissioner to oversee the planning of the new capital city. John Parke Custis had not been the best in his business dealings, and this included the purchase of Abingdon. The home had been purchased with continental currency from the Alexander family in the late 1700s. The Alexander family brought suit against the estate of Custis. In 1792, the property was returned to the Alexander family. The property then went back to the Alexander family. Soon after Abingdon was returned to Robert Alexander, Robert died, and the property was surveyed and split equally between the sons, Robert and Walter. Walter received the southern portion, which had the house sitting on it. Walter leased the property out to many families over the years. The Wise family. George Wise and family acquired Abingdon during the early 1800s. In 1812, the Wise family could see the burning of the Capitol by the British troops. The Wise family did not own all the land. Several people actually owned the land. The Hunter family. General Alexander Hunter acquired 99 acres of the property. The general was a descendant of the Alexander family. Hunter was a wealthy man who liked to beautify the property and the home. Hunter entertained several well-known friends in the Abingdon home, including President James Polk, President John Tyler, and President Andrew Jackson. President Andrew Jackson was even a frequent guest on Sundays. General Hunter died in 1849. Upon his death, the general willed the property to his nephew and namesake, but his brother Bushrod held the property until Alexander came of age. In 1861, Alexander and Bushrod left to join the Confederate Army. In 1881, Hunter advertised Abingdon up for sale. During the absence of the Hunter family, while they were members of the Confederate Army, a New Jersey regiment of the Union Army occupied the plantation. They named the property Camp Princeton. Upon returning home from the war, Alexander Hunter wrote the book Johnny Reb and Billy Yank. In one of the passages of the book, he spoke of the Abingdon. He said, "Between Washington and Alexandria, on the banks of the Potomac, is one of the oldest and finest estates in Virginia. It was the family seat of the Alexanders and Hunters, and has been in the family for nearly 3 centuries. The mansion is still standing and is mostly solidly constructed. The beams and rafters are of solid oak, 2 feet in diameter, and strong enough, and was proven to bear the weight of 2 centuries. Soon after the Hunters' time at the Abington, several brick companies owned the property. There were many over the years. Some included the Alfred Richards Brick Company, and in 1900 the New Washington Brick Company purchased the land. Yellow clay was being dug up from the property. During this time, the superintendent of the brick company was Daniel Allwine. He and his sons are pictured in the photo below. He and his family moved into the Abington rent-free as part of his employment. The Allwine family. On December 31st, 1912, the youngest of the Allwines was born in the Abington home, much like Nellie Custis was. This young girl was my grandmother, Vivian, the only girl of the Allwine family. She is pictured to the right. At a young age, she learned of the historical importance of the home she lived in and realized it was a great privilege to live there. She lived here until the early 1920s, when she was around 10 years old. At this time, the land and home were purchased by the Richmond-Fredericksburg-Potomac Railroad Company. Vivian Allwine married John Ford in 1939. The couple had one daughter, Jeanette, and one grandchild, Jana. That's me. Vivian remained in Arlington, Virginia until 2006 when she moved with her granddaughter to Culpeper, Virginia. During her life, many authors and historians contacted her to learn about her time at the Abington, as well as her family's connection to Dr. Mudd. Vivian was the last living resident of the Abington home. Vivian died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 101 on April of 2014. All of her family has been so fortunate that she gave these interviews because in addition to our memories of her stories, we can read them among the pages of these authors and historians. One such article was published by the Arlington Historical Society. They had a magazine called the Arlington Historical Magazine, and in October of 2003, author Sherman Pratt, also a historian, published an article about my grandmother called Vivian Allwine Ford, Abington's Last Living Resident. In the article, she provided the following quote in regards to the Abington. In the warm and sunny days of spring and autumn, my nearby schoolmates and I had fun when not making trips to and from school. We often had beautiful, warm, and sunny spring days at Abington, with numerous blooms from fruit and other trees. The area was mostly quiet and peaceful, except for the occasional trains that passed nearby on their way to or from the Potomac River Railroad Bridge, when coming from or going into Washington, at which times they usually blew their whistles, but there was no roar of auto traffic as in later years. My brothers and I often played in the Abington yard or in the surrounding fields. In the house, there was a basement with a dirt floor. Some foods were stored in the basement, to include molasses, black walnuts, and chestnuts. My brother Alfred, that we called Freddie, and I would often slip into the basement to sneak molasses. Sometimes we overindulged and got sick with belly aches. Pictured here is a rare view of the inside of Abington. To my knowledge, it's one of the only pictures that actually shows the interior. My grandmother described the house as follows. The Abington house had 10 rooms, 2 large halls, fireplaces, a dining room, a parlor, a den, and the bedrooms were located upstairs. There was a hallway that stretched from the front to the back of the house. Both front and back had double doors. The bathroom was near the porch and had a copper bathtub. The kitchen was at the other end of the porch. There were 2 steps to walk into the dining room. The house had a circular staircase, and under the stairs was a small door leading to the cellar. The cellar was dark and had a dirt floor. Pictured here are 2 photos from the Abington house when family and friends would visit the Allwines. When I was younger, my grandmother helped me in writing an essay that I wrote about the Abington Plantation. Here are some of the notes that she provided me for my essay. There was a little room off the dining room where Mrs. Allwine designated as the playroom. This is also where the family placed the Christmas tree and celebrated family gatherings. The family had a garden where they grew beans and tomatoes and then would drive to D.C. to sell them to the men who had vegetable stands in D.C. The kids often swam in the Potomac River, and when the river froze over, the kids would often walk over to Haynes Point. Vivian and her brother would also catch crawfish from the river. In regards to walking across the river to Haynes Point, Mrs. Allwine often got after the boys for including their little sister in such a dangerous journey. However, Vivian never got in any trouble for this. Not only was the Allwine family able to live in the Abington home rent-free, but they were also paid with Pete the horse. In the picture below, you will see Mrs. Jeanette Allwine as well as Pete the horse. To the right, you will see the paperwork from the New Washington Brick Company, dated November 9, 1906, addressed to Mrs. Dan Allwine. It states, Pete the horse is presented to Mrs. Allwine, knowing that he will be cared for, and as a slight testimonial and recognition of the faithful services of her husband for more than 20 years. It is signed by the President and General Manager. Here is a picture where the garden once stood. My grandmother often, when showing me this picture, would say that it was rumored that this is where Nellie Custis and her little brother would play. In 1922, the Brick Company sold the land to the railroad. The Allwines were allowed to remain in the home, but would have had to pay the high rent. They moved and relocated to South 20th Street. The Beckworth family moved in and remained there until 1927. Over the years, the beautiful home became dilapidated. In 1929, the Daughters of the American Revolution began a push towards restoring Abington. In June of that year, they published an article in their magazine regarding the restoration. An excerpt from that article states, "A year ago, 3 men went down to Washington to see Abington, with the view to discover what remnants of the old original house might yet remain in spite of decay, vandalism, and alterations. They were very familiar with many other old houses of the Tidewater country, where the serene old mansions stand in dignity, hollowed and trim amid accent trees and box-bordered gardens. In dismay, they approached the building, for it was empty and dilapidated, the gardens gone, the fences rotten, and the grounds littered with rubbish. But there was something clean and honest in the old framework. The basis of a true colonial character was here, which, if restored, would show itself to be worthy of the admiration we reserve for the best work of our pioneer forebears. The goodly steep roof, gable walls, sloping rafters were enough to show the graceful outline of the time John Parke Custis and Abington, restored today, could stand as a memorial on the new Mount Vernon Boulevard, which is soon to pass its doors." It went on to say that, within the month, a party was found tenting nearby, while they enjoyed the splendid view of the river and basked in the warmth of a large campfire. The premises are untenanted and uncared for. If Abington is to go out like a candle aflame, the memory of it must still live on to those who have visited here. On March 5, 1930, the oldest building in Arlington County and one of the oldest homes in the nation burned to the ground. High winds fanned the spark of a brush fire, which spread through the bushes and dead weeds of the front lawn of the Abington. The flames quickly spread over the 2-story home. On that spring day that the Abington house went up in flames, Vivian Allwine was at school. She always talked of that day with great sadness. The sound of the fire trucks ran out. Students ran to the windows, and from there they saw smoke rising. Vivian knew that was her old home. Upon arrival at the fire, the Jefferson District Fire Department was unable to put out the fire due to a lack of water. After the fire, the airport authority purchased the land. On September 28, 1938, the site of the Washington National Airport was picked. 2 years to the day later, President Roosevelt laid the cornerstone of the building. The airport opened in June 16th of 1941. Over the years, the airport was remodeled and additions were made, and the name was changed to Reagan National Airport. After many years and many battles, the restoration project of the Abington began. It took a joint effort from the Metro Washington Airport Authority, local, federal, and state government agencies, and historical agencies. Archaeologists carefully went through the grounds, the brick foundation was repaired, and both new and original building materials were used. Finally, in 1998, the Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority preserved the ruins and designated a historical site located between the parking garages at Reagan National Airport. Artifacts of the Abington are also displayed in Terminal A of the airport. In the pictures below, you will see Vivian Allwine's great-grandchildren, Justin, Haley, Kayla, and TJ. They are all standing within the same home that their grandmother, as well as many famous people, stood before them. One of my personal favorite quotes of my grandmother's was also within the pages of the Arlington Historical Magazine. She said, "Future visitors or history buffs may never know that I or the Allwine family lived at the Abington, but at least they can know there was an Abington plantation, where it was located, and something of the unique and exciting role it played in the birth and development of Arlington County in Northern Virginia in the earliest days."